Alrighty y'all, here we are at the end of February, ready to do a little wrap up. Here's a stack of all the books that I read this month. Surprisingly, I don't know if it's surprisingly, but happily, I guess, I ended up finishing my entire February TBR. So that is all 6 books that I picked in my TBR jar picks my reads for the month video, which is really exciting because that's what I need to be doing to decrease my physical TBR. This month, like usually other months, I read a variety of different genres. So that was romance, some thriller, some fantasy, just all sorts of little genres here and there. Luckily, all 6 books that I picked, all 6 have been read, and now let's get into talking about them. First book that we read in February, which was Reckless by Lauren Roberts. This is book 2 in the Powerless trilogy, and this is a fantasy. I ended up rating this, actually don't even know what I ended up rating it. I rated this 3.75 stars. Now this is all about Peyton and Kai. If you read the first book, Peyton and Kai were really kind of being introduced into their relationship, into who they are as individual characters, and something pretty surprising happens at the end of the first book. And then this one, we kind of pick up right where that one ends off. I will say this one is more medium paced, maybe even slower paced than the first book for sure. The first book, there's a lot happening. We're kind of going and getting a lot of things done. In this one, it's really just more of a character study, and we're following our 2 main characters, which are Peyton and Kai. We're following them on this journey that you could argue they're not doing much. But I still found it to be entertaining. I mean, for it to be rated 3.75 stars, that's almost a 4-star rating. I really started to fall in love with our characters. I really do see the struggles of who they are individually, but still trying to develop and nurture the little itty bitty relationship that's growing between them. I will say I desperately felt like I needed more Kit in this book, but the way this book ended, I just know we're gonna get so much more Kit in the next book. So I'm very excited for that one to come out. And I think that's in April. So we're very close to seeing the final end of the trilogy. Other than that, like I mentioned, their relationship, you really start seeing a lot of it. There's a lot of banter. The banter in this is so good. It's a very heavy dialogue book. So there's just so much dialogue between them going back and forth. It's so flirty, very witty. It's pretty funny too. Overall, I feel like I can't see like a movie or a series being done from this book and the first book alone, because overall I feel like not much has happened. But I'm gonna wait to finish the last book once it's released and just see overall how I feel about the series. But this one individually, 3.75. Next up is a romance, and it is Reckless. Same exact title as the last book we just talked about, but this is book number 4, in the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver. And this one, my gosh, I almost rated this 5 stars. I rated this 4.75 stars. It was so good. It's just a great romance. Very unexpected things happen in like the first 80 pages of this book where I was caught off guard for sure. And then it kind of grows on that. I will say Winter, the main female character, I just love her. We literally get to see like her defrosting, because in the other book she's teased as this very like stern, very cold type of person. But honestly, I found that to be sort of relatable, because she, in my opinion, is just misunderstood, and she just doesn't express her emotions, and she's been through a lot. So I definitely loved seeing her kind of warming up and opening up. Theo, the male main character in this book, is one of my favorite male main characters ever. He is just so, I don't even know what word to use. He's just the definition of like a crush. He had me kicking my feet and giggling. Their relationship was everything. I really almost debated rating this 5 stars. That just says everything. This is definitely my second favorite book in the series. Might be tied for first, even though the first book, in my opinion, would be Powerless, which I rated 5 stars. But this one was just so good on its own as well. I loved everyone in the found family. I feel like the found family aspect is so strong in this book. Obviously, it's the 4th book in the series, so we're really developing these relationships and getting to know our found family a lot more. It's a feel-good, happy romance that you'll definitely walk away being so, just like blushing, honestly. Like, you're gonna be blushing reading this book. At the end of the day, we really just go through the trenches of following our main characters, trying to navigate a life-altering kind of change. And with that being said, I loved it. I wish I could reread it already. I did end up annotating it because I'm attempting to annotate the entire series. And now I only have one left, which is Hopeless, so we'll see when I get around to that one. Next book that I read was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. So this was a new release. It literally came out in the month of February, snatched it up, read it. rated it 4 stars. This centers on two swimmers who go to, actually no, one of them's a swimmer, one of them's a diver. They go to Stanford, so they're athletes, which I love that. I feel like usually Ali Hazelwood's books are based on STEM romances, and this one is not. This one I will say is also very, very physical, very spicy. She does make kind of a disclaimer on the first like cover page that way you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. But like I mentioned, this is a sports college romance, so it is everything. I love that environment, and the friendships in this are very interesting because we have Vandy, Lucas, and Penn as our 3 main characters. Well, you could argue that Lucas and Vandy are the 2 main characters. One's a swimmer, one's a diver. They're kind of the couple that we focus on. But Penn is definitely very integral to this whole like relationship. I went back and forth on like loving her, hating her for a moment, and then loving her again. And I feel like that contributed to the 4-star rating. I feel like I would have actually rated this higher if I didn't have such conflicting feelings towards Penn, because I wanted to love her, but I feel like for the sake of conflict, we kind of threw in something that was not necessarily very needed. I feel like we could have done without it and it would have been just as strong of a book. With that being said, the side characters are super funny. I feel like you'll find that in every Ali Hazelwood book. I won't say this is my favorite because it's not, but I still feel like this was a good read. It was decent and I would still recommend it. I will say, like other Ali Hazelwood books, the main characters really build their relationship and relate to each other on a very vulnerable sort of state and through their past like traumas almost, and that makes them have a very strong emotional connection. But obviously too, the physicality is a very primal aspect of their relationship, so if that's not something you're super interested in, then I could see why someone would pass on this book. I did find this a little bit predictable just because I feel like I know Ali Hazelwood's recipe, but regardless, I was still entertained. Moving on to our 4th book of the month, it was Razorback Tears. I rated this 4.5 stars, so this was a close 5-star read, mostly because it was pretty emotional. This is about 2 men who could not be more different than each other, but they still have things that definitely bind them together, unfortunately. This is about a black father and a white father, and they are more alike than they care to admit because of the things that they've gone through. Basically, this is 2 very flawed fathers striking up an unlike relationship. So through the journey of vengeance, basically they learn a lot about each other and individually. This does touch on topics of racism, prejudice, talks a lot about the differences that they face socially and culturally, and a lot of it is written bluntly. Like, you do not have to read between the lines, it's there, and I really appreciate that the author kind of represented that, because it's important to just kind of note the stark differences that they face just because of their race. These 2 fathers, no violence, they are not new to that, but they really have to kind of face their inner turmoil with feelings and emotions. They embark on this crazy journey that's graphic, dark, gruesome, but for a reader's sake, it is entertaining. Definitely felt like a movie. I could definitely see this as like a movie or TV adaptation. It's a bit emotional at the end, but I do appreciate that this does bring about a very necessary conversation. Moving on, we have our 5th read of the month. It was a thriller called Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. This is the 3rd book from this author that I've ever read, and I'm a big fan of her work, I'm not gonna lie. I just find that her books are very engaging and they will keep you on your toes. This one specifically is about a woman named Paris who wakes up in the bathroom of her apartment holding a razor blade, and her husband is dead in the bathtub behind her. So from there, we kind of go on this journey of what happened. Is she reliable? Is she telling the truth? Like, what's going on? This is told in a dual POV. One of them is our main character Paris, and one of them is a true crime podcast host named Drew, and his podcast is actually called Things We Do in the Dark. And so he's trying to investigate this other kind of like Ice Queen is her name, who is a convicted murderer. It's very dark and twisty. We go on a journey of secrets, heartbreak. It will definitely hook you and you won't want to put it down. I will say I found it a little bit predictable, but with that being said, I still was very entertained the entire way through it, and I read this in maybe a day or 2, so that means it was pretty fast-paced as well. There is a lot of trauma talk, specifically childhood trauma, so trigger warning there. Very enjoyable, and I would recommend. I love anything this author writes, TBH. All right, next up was a romance called A Love Song for Ricky Wilde. Now, I actually read this from my library, so since then I have returned it. I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. Honestly, this book, right, just when I think back on it, it was just fun. It was very lighthearted. Tia Williams, she did the dang thing. I really, really loved her book, 7 Days in June, and I will say there is a cameo from the couple in that book in this book, and I loved that. It definitely made my day reading that. I feel like the way the author writes, she just makes things very easy to understand and very digestible. She also laces a lot of humor into her work, which makes the experience as the reader very enjoyable because I'm like halfway to cracking up, and a lot of her like slang that she uses is very relevant, so it's just funny. It was a good time. It's about Ricky and Ezra, and honestly their relationship was almost insta-lovey, a little too insta-lovey for me, but when you understand why, like, it makes sense. There's also a touch of magical realism in this book, so that kind of definitely turned things and switched things up a notch. It's not my favorite rom-com. Again, a little bit predictable. I feel like I knew where it was gonna go maybe once I was like 60% through the book, but it was still fun. It was still an easy read. I will emphasize that I found it to be just easy. It takes place in Harlem, New York, so if that's a location or a setting that you prefer, I definitely recommend it. It kind of gave like Bridgerton season 2 vibes, like the relationship. Those are the vibes that I was getting. There were 2 timelines, kind of one in the present with our main character, Ricky, who's a female. She's named after her dad. And then the past of this guy named Breeze. And I will say I was more kind of invested in the current timeline versus the past timeline. But the past one holds a lot of importance to the actual like story in general. So don't skip that by any means. It's not one that will stick with me forever, but it did its job as a good, fun, entertaining book. Next up is book number 7, and it was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. This was also a new release, so we got 2 new releases this month, and this is a romance. I will say up until like 70% of this book, I loved it. I was eating it up. I ended up rating this 3.75 stars, but I'm not gonna lie, up until 70%, it was at like 4.25, and then it just drastically dropped. I loved the relationship between our 2 main characters. This is Aiden and this is Lucy. Aiden is a radio talk show host. His radio show is called Heartstrings, and it takes place in Baltimore, which is pretty cute. Oh, there we go. It says, "Welcome to Heartstrings, Baltimore's romance hotline." If you've ever watched Sleepless in Seattle, this book is very much related to that movie, or they say that it's very similar. I've never seen that movie, so I went into this pretty blindly, like not really knowing what was gonna happen. The flirting was so good. The slow burn was so good. I didn't find it slow. I found that it was very romantic, like the things that were happening. Loved them. Loved Aiden, loved Lucy, loved the way that their little relationship was forming. I love Lucy's employment too, which I think was really, really cool of B.K. Borison to add. Also, I just love their names. Lucy and Aiden, like those are such good names. But basically, Lucy needs help with her love life, so her daughter Maya calls into the hotline and Aiden answers, and she kind of wants advice for her mom, unbeknownst to Lucy herself. So then Lucy gets on the hotline and then things happen and we go from there. I feel like there was a lot of acts of service, active listening until we hit 70% through. As always, a 3rd act breakup is not my favorite, and I feel like specifically in this book, once we got over that 3rd act breakup, I really wasn't convinced that Aiden was the guy for Lucy. I actually ended this book thinking Lucy deserved better, which is so unfortunate because you don't want to think that walking away from a romance book. I just feel like Aiden needed a little bit of therapy and needed to work on himself before getting into a long-term relationship. So yeah, those are my feelings. It was a little bit of a roller coaster ride for me. Read at your own risk. I don't know if I'll say I recommend it. I will be continuing the series though. Last but not least, we have Daydream, which is a romance. This is book number 3 in the Maple Hills like series, interconnected series, I would say. I don't think you have to read the other books before reading this one. Okay, let me just say I rated this 2.5 stars, which was sad. It was a pretty big disappointment because I definitely was highly anticipating this book for the longest time. Hallie or Haley, I don't really know how to say her name, but her and Henry go to University of California, Maple Hills. Henry is a ice hockey team captain, while Haley, she is a student, a baker, and works at a bookstore. So she's a bookish girly, which is a pro, definitely. Also, Hannah Grace, she's a Swiftie because there are so many Taylor Swift references mentioned, which made the book enjoyable. I don't know, I feel like I was up to 60% of this book and I felt like nothing had happened, which is very unfortunate. I just felt like my attention wasn't there. It was not engaging. Again, nothing was happening. And then I just feel like I drew to the conclusion that I liked the characters individually, like they were great, but I feel like they would have been better with different partners. Like I feel like their relationship was almost forced for the sake of being a romance, but in real life, like I just don't think they would have worked out, and I think that they would have been better with other partners. There were kind of longish chapters in this book, which I don't love. The font is also kind of small. I just really didn't feel connected to the characters or their budding romance. There was just a lack of chemistry. It felt too forced in my opinion. There was like too much apologizing to each other. It just didn't seem realistic, if I'm being honest. Too much acting like they don't know what's going on when they could have just communicated a lot more clearly. And I feel like Hannah Grace is usually an author who writes her male main characters to be very communicative, but this one just fell short. I don't know. I think it just might have been the actual romance. It didn't vibe with me. It wasn't written for me and it just didn't sit well, but maybe for other people like it would. Like I mentioned, individually great characters, romantic, but I don't know, I just didn't see them together. It felt almost choppy, repetitive, boring, and I feel like the found family aspect too just wasn't hitting. Like I wasn't really connected to them, even though the book before this, Wildfire, I rated 5 stars, and I love Aurora and Russ. They do have a very big kind of role in this book, but like there was just so many other characters being introduced and talked about that I felt like my attention was always kind of being divided. It was cute. There were some quotes that were like memorable, but overall I will not be thinking about this book. Those are my opinions. Those were all the books that I read in February. Lots of romances because it was romance month. But now we are looking forward to March, and I'm very excited for the books that I'm going to read in March, even though I have so many on my TBR. Hopefully we can get through it just like we did this month, but that's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye!